First of all, hello and welcome to all of you who are tuning into today's session here with the EU SME Centre in collaboration with the Danish Chamber of Commerce in China. While we are still waiting for the last participants to join us here, I can maybe just reiterate that today's topic is on new retail, with the subtitle How to Reach the Modern Chinese Consumers and Boost Your Sales in China. Today's session is also a special one. And why is it a special one? It is a special one because it is actually the final activity, the final session workshop that we have in the EU SME Centre phase 3. So quite a special one at the end of a long journey that we've had. What is the EU SME Centre? Well, before we get into today's topic, I would like to just give a brief introduction to what the EU SME Centre is and what we have been doing the last couple of months or years, in fact. So let's get right into it here. The EU SME Centre is an EU Commission funded project that has been operating in some capacity since the year of 2010, so 12 years already. The purpose is to help European small and medium-sized enterprises in getting ready to do business in China, in the Chinese market. Currently, the phase, as I just said, is in its third phase. There has also been a phase 1 and a phase 2, and it says here the project has been running for 18 months. Well, that is true, but we have also had a final extension. So that is why we are concluding here in June today with our last session today. The EU SME Centre helps prepare European companies to do business in China by providing a couple of different services. And these services are some that I will get a little bit more into now. Also, I should mention that the EU SME Centre is an official member of the Enterprise Europe network. And to date, we have partnered with over 270. I think that number is closing in on 300 different government agencies and business support organizations in both Europe and in China as well. In the phase 3, we do have boots on the ground physical office in the heart of Beijing in Sanlitun. And that is also from Beijing, where I'm calling you from today. But of course, also good morning to all of you who are tuning in from Europe. One extra thing I should say is that the EU SME Centre is possible through the 4 different chambers of commerce and also 1 business council. They are the implementing partners, and they are as follows: the China-Italy Chamber of Commerce, the China-Britain Business Council, the Danish Chamber of Commerce in China, Eurochambres, and also the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. So those are the 5 different organizations that are the implementing partners of phase 3. As I mentioned, what is the EU SME Centre doing? Well, basically it is doing services in 4 different categories: the Knowledge Centre, the Advice Centre, the Training Centre, and the SME Advocacy Platform. The first one of those, the Knowledge Centre, is in a nutshell, it means that the EU SME Centre is publishing a lot of market reports and guidelines and case studies that are freely available on the EU SME Centre website that you can go in and you can have a look at to hopefully get some more up-to-date knowledge on the various aspects of doing business in China. So please check it out. We are continuing to expand that offering under the Knowledge Centre. The second pillar of the 4 is the Advice Centre. And the Advice Centre, I'm going to be talking about 2 different things. The first is I'd like to highlight our self-diagnosis tool that we have developed here in our phase 3 of the project. The self-diagnosis tool is basically a self-assessment test where you go into the EU SME Centre website and then you answer a series of questions about your current business situation, how far you may be or may not be into doing business in China at the moment. And then this quite extensive tool will give you a number of suggestions into what perhaps you could, with benefit, look a little bit more into in terms of getting even more ready to do business in China. So please check that out. That is, of course, also free of charge, as is all the services of the EU SME Centre. The other aspect of the Advice Centre that I also always like to highlight is our Ask the Expert function. The Ask the Expert function is on our website. You click the button and then you can ask any kind of question about doing business in China. And then our team of experts will get back to you in a span of around 4 to 5 working days. And hopefully provide you some useful information in regards to your question, and perhaps even link to a market report or a recording of another workshop such as today that we have done in the past that could hopefully give you some beneficial information. The third of the 4 pillars of what the EU SME Centre is doing is the training center. The training center is, of course, what we are all here for today. It means that we are doing a range of different seminars, some online, some offline, some both. And we're covering various aspects of doing business in China. Today, of course, we're covering new retail and sort of that aspect of China. So as we always like to say, please give us suggestions as to what aspects of doing business in China that may be of interest to you. And then we will try and have our upcoming events be about that in the future, either our events or perhaps our market reports. The fourth I want to get through before we get move on to the topic of today is that the EU SME Centre also acts as an advocacy platform. That means that the EU SME Centre shares on our website and on our various social media platforms updates on different issues that may affect the regulatory landscape for a European small, medium-sized enterprise looking to do business in China. That is a field that is changing every now and then, so we do what we can to share the updates in that regard. Also, we have an interchamber SME working group where we also meet with relevant stakeholders in China to provide the advice and concerns of European companies to the decision makers in China. So that is the fourth aspect of it. Now, we'll not be talking too much more before we get into it. Here, we always share the list of upcoming events, but as I have already teased in the beginning, today is in fact our last event that we have in phase 3. But stay tuned for the EU SME Centre activities in the future beyond phase 3 as well, because there will still be ways that we can support your European business in doing business in China. Now, last little house cleaning here is that we will have a Q&A session at the end of today's session. So if you already now have a question in mind that you would like to ask today's expert speakers on, I encourage you to already submit your question now, because then you can be sure to have your question in the beginning and be sure that we have enough time to get to your question. But you are, of course, also encouraged to submit your question as you go along if there's something that our speakers present that you would like to hear some more information about. And how do you submit a question? You do it just here in the Zoom system down in the bottom. No matter if you're checking in from your phone or your laptop, there should be a button that says Q&A. So please use the Q&A function to ask your question there, because sometimes in the chat, we may not be able to have a clear overview. So please use the Q&A function and please use it. We very much like to answer your questions. So with that out of the way, I'm not going to be talking too much more, because let's get into our topic of today. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it will be touching on the new retail, how to reach the modern Chinese consumers and boost your sales in China. And to talk about this session, which is a collaboration between the EU SME Centre and one of its implementing partner, the Danish Chamber of Commerce in China, we have 2 expert speakers with us today. One of them is Stefano Sensi, who is the general manager of Deluxe luxury retail brand Georg Jensen. Stefano, he has had a long experience of working with retail in China, so his perspective will be very very insightful. And also to complement and to support Stefano, we also have Klaus Petersen. And Klaus, he is an entrepreneur who has been in China for a long time by now, and has been involved in a range of different entrepreneurial projects. As of late, Klaus is the chairman, also the owner of Lane House, which is a specialty store retail business operating with Lego and so on. So Klaus also has a lot of very insightful information into sharing advice for retail in China. So Stefano and Klaus, if you are ready, then let's get into it with today's presentation. Warm welcome and thank you guys for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear us, Nikolai? See and hear?
Hear and see you loud and clear.
Fabulous. Okay. So yeah, let's get into it. I mean, we will I would say the objective here is we have 1 hour to talk about how to reach the consumer and how to boost your sales, which is of course ambitious because 1 hour is not a lot, but really what we have here is, I mean, with Stefano as a brand owner and me as a distributor, we can cover a lot of the bases. So what we are trying to do here in the presentation is to touch upon a number of things, hopefully in a fairly holistic way. Can't do a deep dive into many things, but still really get through in terms of how we look at our running our businesses and especially around the customer engagement. We will be ping-ponging along the slides and try to make it a little bit more fun and active, engaging. I mean, we're hitting afternoon. I mean, in Europe it's morning, right? But grab your coffees and hopefully it's going to be a good, fun, interactive session. And please do ask a lot of questions in the beginning. So maybe with that said, Nikolai, if you can take on to the next slide, that'll be fantastic.
Klaus, maybe I can add that. Being 1 hour, as you say, is quite ambitious to get through all these topics. And I think maybe for many of you today, we'll be creating more questions and answers, but hopefully we'll also be focusing on what are the right questions to ask for you personally.
Super. So of course, before diving into the session, and this is probably not a question that is a big surprise for most people, but why China? Why are we here, right? And of course, in many of the categories, it is the largest consumer market in the world today. And if it's not number one, it's probably number two on the way to becoming number one. I mean, certainly if you see from some of the big brands, we listed some of them here, but I think it's pretty consistent with people that here already, from the Uniqlos of the world, 25% of the global sales is in China. Starbucks is 13, which just talks about the massive scale that we have here in China. And really, I would say not engaging with the Chinese consumer in China is really not, we believe, an option. Is something one must do as a brand and global strategy. Some of the categories, certainly the one that Stefano is in, Chinese buyers can even be 40%. They can even be higher, and these are numbers that have started a few years ago. That really included both travels. So we saw certainly like tourism, retail travels. People go to Paris, London, New York, and what have you, with the main purpose, certainly Hong Kong, Singapore, to buy stuff. Back then, there was also, of course, price differences and maybe certain products you couldn't get in China. Some of the I would say a big trend driver we'll talk about on the next slide as well is that during COVID, we haven't seen these outbound Chinese tourists anymore. And that completely changes the picture of how to reach to the Chinese consumer. And it really one needs to be here. So out of that 40%, that's actually Chinese consumption within luxury retail has even increased over the last 2 years. But the lion's share of that demand now is happening in China. So as a brand owner, as a distributor, one cannot sit in Paris anymore and wait for people to go into your Champs-Élysées store. One needs to be in Shanghai or wherever is the right locations for your brand. But I think this is why we are here, right? Why China? What do you think, Steph? Do you agree with this?
Yes, I fully agree, and I think. For us, and I know for many brands, especially in the luxury category, it's not only about sales, it's also about being here and understanding what the perception of your brand is, what the direction of it is from a local point of view, and not only what let's say, consumers who are traveling to London or Paris already know about your brand. So it kind of changes the game a little bit in terms of communication and understanding brand perception.
So next slide, Nikolai. So some of the market and channel trends that we see laid down here in a few bullet points are, first of all, no doubt that the expansion of consumption is becoming a main pillar of Chinese economic development. Yes, we still have infrastructure and real estates and what have you, but consumption is a heavier weight on developments like we've seen anyone else, getting up on the S curves in developments. What we see also is a big change between the various consumer groups. In the last few years, we talked a lot about Gen Z as the new emerging young consumer, but frankly, the Gen Z is already, many of the Gen Zs have left university. They are in the late 20s. They have entered the workforce, and that's becoming more of a maturing consumer, a big one. But we also see some of the younger ones, the post-95 generations, post-90 are really becoming a big chunk of consumption. So understanding that, and there's a lot of changes between these segments, it's really critical in order to. Oh shit! Sorry, there was somebody called me there. That's happened. But then the second one is the emergence of the senior consumers willing to spend on themselves. That's certainly something that we see in our stores that's come along the last, I would say, few years. That it used to be that the senior generation were not willing to spend on themselves, but now we do see that great goal there. In the early 60s, they are maybe retired. They are well off. They rode well the real estate bubble. No debt, kids are off school, so no school fees, and they actually have a lot of consumption power. And they start to say, "Hey, I also want to, sweeten my life a bit." And they go in, and we see it in some of our downtown Shanghai stores, for example, IAPM. That during the day where the younger generation are at work, those are the ones you see go into the stores, and they go into the Gucci's and the Apples, and they spend big. And we see this in our stores. They don't go to the lower priced SKU section. This is the they go right to the bigger boxes, and so that's something to think about as well. Really a diversification around the segments to attack or to address. Import consumption is continuing to increase as well. In certain sectors, beauty, health, and family, we write here, but there's also others. That doesn't mean that Chinese consumer brands are not in the game too. I mean, certainly they are, and more so. And we certainly see them more and more visible in the malls to take prime locations, whether it's some of the EV cars or it's some of the new F&B brands like Haiti and so on. They go in and take the real prime locations, spend a lot of money on rent, and are very aggressively building out locations. So you certainly have that trend as well. So on one part, there's the imports, but there's also an increased willingness to go with the local brands, and they tend to be very, very sharp on the propositions to the consumer. So then on the retail channels, and we will talk through this the presentation about this, but we definitely see across offline retail and online retail, a number of players are pouring in with new concept of how to address that same consumer. We added some of the buzzwords here that have been very big the last couple of years on e-commerce. One is group buy. We also saw it under the lockdown in Shanghai that certain brands, consumers couldn't go to the stores, but they were allowed to pool in buying groups in let's say a community development, and there could be deliveries to people in that way. So coming on the apps now that is the very clear, distinct positioning between the different players here in China. They start to really come in and all want to be, if the social media player, they want to be an e-commerce guy and vice versa, right? So they start to be the super happy take those positionings. Continuous development of cross-border platforms, and that's been a topic on EU for this one certainly is our belief as the on reach to Chinese consumer in China today, and it keeps expanding. I certainly see over COVID as well that it have been, let's say, addressing the challenges that's there. So yeah, maybe over to you, Stefan.
Quite the overview. Yeah, I think it's a quickly developing and changing market with different challenges and different opportunities. And I think really being flexible and understanding your business as to where we are today and what direction the market is going in creates a vast amount of opportunities in the future. So Nicola, I think we can go to the next slide. So in Jensen in China, for those of you who don't know, Jensen is from 1904. We're a Scandinavian design brand, primarily working in home design articles and jewelry, almost split 50-50. Jewelry is a little bit larger for us as a category. Our core is in fine silver. So this is handmade silver from Copenhagen, which was kind of the origin of the brand. In 2018, we kind of reset China, and I was asked to join in this position. I was previously doing brand activation, and I found myself in the position that many brands are in who I advise, which is kind of where to begin. There's many brands who have a significant sales activity in China, whether it be beforehand or before Chinese consumers purchasing in their native markets and bring it back to China, or whether it be cross-border or whether through dealers, and kind of where to start this communication. So in 2019, we launched our Tmall store, which is now top 1% within the home design category. End of last year, we launched JD, where we're up to 890,000 followers or fans. We have 3 retail stores this year with more in the pipeline, but we'll get back to that. And at this point, we're on a number of touch points. So Tmall, JD, Xiaohongshu, which is Red, Douyin, which is TikTok, WeChat, Weibo. But it did not start this way. And there's a reason for this, which we'll get into. And in terms of wholesale for home, we have a nationwide presence, and we have offices in Beijing and Shanghai. But it's a quite exciting journey to see the process from zero and follow it every year, growing quite aggressively. So there are opportunities to find. It's just about knowing which direction to go in.
I mean, it's pretty impressive that you are at a top 1 performer on Tmall. It's, I mean, that's very well done. I'm certainly doing my to health. I just bought a wine cooler here a week ago with the, Beijing hitting 38 degrees. So gonna have some chillness. So, but yeah, on JD, almost 1 million followers. That's amazing. Well done.
We appreciate the support, Kofi. All right, Nikolai, next slide. All right, coming from a brand activation background, I think a brand in terms of everything. And I think the O2O era is over in my point of view. For me, what brand is now with so many touch points everywhere and the barrier to purchase being so low, all touch points matter and all touch points count. So that's everything from your store clerk to your packaging, to the comment section on your WeChat articles, to the look of a store. Everything counts, as well as the products. Something I'm very keen on is we want to tell a brand story, for example, on Tmall, and it's maybe not all products that sell in the same way, but as you can see the chart on the right, Amazon is growing every year in terms of search. It's the 2nd largest search engine in the US. And this is what I mean to highlight with this is not only a sales platform, but also where consumers go to find information where they then maybe later might go to the store or to see the full offering of the brand, and is more than just a sales channel. So social wants to become commerce, and commerce wants to become social, especially in China. I feel a few years ago, and I feel in the West, it's more like this, that you have clear sales platforms and you have clear social media platforms or entertainment platforms, where over the last 3 or 4 years, it's been drastically merging from the Chinese market. Can you go to next slide? So with the landscape changing so quickly, I say we don't claim to be experts. I think it's quite difficult to call yourself an expert about something which is changing on a day-to-day basis, and which is a first for all of us. We don't know where it's going, to be clear. If you had asked whether a jewelry store would be acceptable on Tmall 3 years ago, it would be a sharp no. If you ask today, it's a yes. If you ask whether there would be live streaming on Tmall a few years ago, it'd be a sharp no. Today, it's a huge part of their business, or driving their business. So it's really important to be keen and to know where to apply your energy and your resources, so you don't try to spread yourself too far. It's important that on all the channels you choose to be on, and that's to say you do not need to choose to be on all channels, you must have a uniform omni-channel presence and a key brand message. I normally say with Jensen, and maybe it's because I grew up with Jensen, it's quite close to me. But where the markets where we do well, our consumers know they want to buy Jensen before they know exactly what Jensen product they want to buy. And I think by really being clear in your message across channels, you create a feeling, and that feeling is what drives the purchase in the end. So when we speak to brands in Europe, especially brands who want to embark on the journey that we've been on for the last 4 or 5 years, it's often a quite vast, kind of a bit, unenergetic question of where to begin. There's certain brands, they already have a number of sales in China. They also want to have a digital presence. They want to have a quote unquote personality in China. And before it was, WeChat is the super app, and Tmall or JD would be the sales channel. I think now, depending on what brand you are, and especially what content you generate, the answers to those questions can be quite different. So it's really important before applying any resources to know what is your brand and your content most suitable for in terms of platform.
Mm. And this is, I fully agree with this. And this is something that, we are not strangers to in offline, right? I mean, the way you position a brand, what mall are you in? If you're a high-end brand, you want to be in certain high-end malls, or you're a mass market brand, are you tier 1, what are you? So that fit with the brand positioning and your, let's say, store locations is critical. And I see that happening more and more in e-commerce in China too, where in the beginning it was just one, you just want to be on Taobao, and that became Tmall. But certainly in the last, I would say, couple of years, I see new platforms coming up where Tmall is almost getting too big. Is too big a supermarket. So you've got all sorts of brands from high and low in there. And you have some brands that say, okay, this is not really hitting the right consumer I want to find. Is getting too mass market, for an example. I'm not getting the right traffic. I'm not getting the right comments. I'm not getting the right feedback. And I get a little bit of a mismatch there in my positioning. And you see other platforms are now coming up with those more females, certain ones or what have you, where the brand will say, okay, it's actually of all the platforms, I just want to be on these couple, and making that right choice is very important. And again, it's for the last God knows how many years, this is something we have done offline as a main part, right? With the 4 Ps, where you put your product is of course critical. And I see that more and more on e-commerce too. So I think your point, what you said is you're saying no to a number of platforms that may not fit exactly makes a lot of sense. And that you probably not losing a lot of traffic there anyways. And you can find that on your more geared or tailored channel. So understanding that ecosystem, and I'm finding that changing very, very quickly. And just on Tmall, some of the promotions we are running, we have completely different results now than we had 1 or 2 years ago, and because of some of these shifts that we see here.
Yeah, and I think that your online and offline strategy mimic each other. So as as you know, Kope, the location of your store and who's around you is critical to the success of it, and you don't want to be everywhere. And what we've been wrestling with, especially over the last few years, for example, with Douyin, which is domestic TikTok, is when our team has a little bit of FOMO around not being there, I come back and I say, you know, what can we do there? Is it interesting? Is it a value add? Or would it just be being there because we have FOMO? So it's only until very recently that we only joined a few months ago, where we have the right setup, we have the right content creation, we have live streaming studios, we have the right resources to do something that we think is a value add and interesting. Because also I think people will come meet your brand on a platform that's maybe not suited to you, and even though they might be one of your consumers, they'll look at you and think you're boring or, you know, not very interesting compared to other brands. And going back from that's very difficult.
Yeah.
Can you go on the next slide, please? So these are a few platforms here, and then amongst many others. So this is just to get a bit of an idea. It must be said that this chart here is the collective opinions from my team together, where we kind of discuss how we feel about these platforms. And I think for there's many pockets, and for many different people, these platforms mean many different things. But I think this is what we feel in the broader sense. So these are all platforms that are banking on sales. So there's also for communication Weibo and others, but as they don't have a big sales presence, we haven't added them. So if you go full social, WeChat, which I think everyone knows as this quote unquote super app, it's important to note that WeChat is closed loop. So you can only see what your friends do or accounts that you follow do. So the ability to go viral on WeChat is extremely difficult. Then you have apps like Xiaohongshu, so Red, that in the beginning were makeup tutorials, and now you'll see much for the dislike of, much for the, let's say, negative aspect of Tmall, that a lot of marketing dollars that would otherwise before have gone to Tmall go on Xiaohongshu with influencers and with videos on how to use products. You have apps like Douwu or Poison, which are reseller apps. They started as a sneaker app and now moved into all forms of luxury. I've added Amazon because for me, JD and Amazon have kind of the same vibe. It's not very emotional. It's not super luxury, but logistics is to JD what cloud is to Amazon. They really created a logistics infrastructure that's incomparable. And then we have Pinduoduo all the way to the left, which is quite interesting. This is started as a group buy app in rural China and now is being used. So we're talking very low price points and very large volumes, but we're seeing a number of luxury brands using it in creative ways to make statements with certain products and certain drops. So there's an ability to do many things on all these different apps. It's about knowing them and knowing how you fit in.
I mean, some of the things that we see, it's I mean, and it is a great picture here, is that, you know, a few years ago you saw some let's say online only or digital native brands coming into the Chinese market. These are normally Chinese local brands, and they reach, you know, tremendous traffic and sales very, very quickly. Because what we need to remember here is what we're looking at, and we contrast with the West, is these are all B2B2C channels, what I would call B2B2C, right? These are all platforms. So almost like a mall operator that I work with in the offline world, you need to work with these companies in order to drive traffic. You know, Tmall today, for an example, I think, you know, generally across, is there's very little organic traffic into the stores. So you need to actively work with the mall operator, let's say Alibaba in Tmall's case, the category managers, in order to have promotional activities, be part of, you know, whatever it is, in order to drive traffic into your store. And that's something I've seen changing a lot here the last couple of years, where it used to be, hey, open up a store on Tmall, boom, just by being new and fresh and hip, you could almost expect that there will be some people coming into your store and with low customer acquisition costs. That has changed a lot. And for people who want to scale on Tmall only, online only, with a big, brand already built, will find it is very, very expensive. A second thing is, I feel that you almost have to buy your customer again and again, contrasting that with a physical mall. Once you got your store in let's say blue zone next to Starbucks, the customer can always find you again. You need to sell them first. They need to get you into the store first, but then you'll remember where you are, and you don't need to have another spend, or let's say another customer acquisition cost spend for next time the consumer goes into the mall. You have that a bit on some of these online platforms, and you almost have to buy your sales again. So really, it's a proactive, very ongoing work with the category managers in order to maintain your presence, your traffic, your ratings, and so on these online stores. And I think that's also why we see some of the proliferations, right? Whereas Red is now getting into e-commerce, and Douyin is getting into e-commerce, and so on. But that's certainly one of my key takeaways, that it's getting much more busy, or let's say, or active, the way one needs to manage the online stores.
Yeah, I think the ROI on where you spend your marketing dollars is shifting quite fluidly, depending on which apps are trending and which tools Tmall and JD and others have, and who opens e-commerce, who doesn't. But I think that it's really a 360 press to do it well. I think you really have to understand where you're effective, and engage in things like live streaming to kind of create an emotional bond with the consumer. Yeah.
And there's whole ecosystems around these apps, right? I mean, working with Tmall, you need to engage with certain set of logistics providers, payment providers. You have the TP, which is store operators. Doing that on Douyin or JD, you have some of the same players, or they're separate players. So again, you have to have an ecosystem around that store there too. So once I would say the choice of opening up more stores also comes with a resource requirement. It's not just opening one store with one e-commerce manager and then you can perpetually keep opening other stores. It's quite a lot of work to work with these ecosystems that each company have developed. Bit of a walled garden concept, right? Of course, they want to make sure that the brand owners are kept in their ecosystem. So that's also been a big, I would say, some big choices one needs to make on, where to spend the resources, also back office wise, because you really need to work these stores in order to get the traffic and the sales.
Exactly. We can maybe roll into the next slide. So I wanted to highlight a little bit, Little Red Book for Xiaohongshu, just as an example. It started as a live streaming makeup tutorial, and now is a full social media channel for both pictures and videos, as well as they're moving towards a commerce push. Their mix is quite interesting. It's 100 million monthly active users, almost 85% of them female, between the age of 20 and 35. So I think for a large chunk of brands in the world, this is exactly the demographic they're aiming for. This is what gives Xiaohongshu quite a bit of power. And where before maybe your marketing budget for Tmall would go to Tmall or JD, now a big chunk of this is going to Xiaohongshu. As what I've learned from doing business here for so long is I think consumers here are extremely curious. When we do live streams, it's not just saying this is a product, this is what it does. We get questions about how it's made, where it's made, when it was made, what's on the bottom of it, what's inside it, what's on the sides. At the same time, they're going on to our .dk website to check prices, to check assortment, to check, and apps like Xiaohongshu and the KOLs and KOCs on it really guide quite a lot of consumers.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is a must-be app to be on if the consumer is female, and they have a lot of credibility because it's only recently they started adding e-commerce functionality on it. And I certainly find the e-commerce team at Little Red very cautious in the way that they're building this, because the credibility they had by being more of a product review channel. I mean, there was a channel where consumers would go and see, I mean, like the pictures we see here with makeups and so on. Consumers would talk about to consumers and say, hey, I bought this. This is what I like about the product and so on. And that wasn't really a personal stake in that sale. So the consumer felt very, okay, this is an honest review. And then later, if they like it, they can go and find, sales later on. Of course, now you start to have flagship stores on it. You see Perfect Dairy here, right? I mean, these are not just C2C, you certainly get the B2C in, and now we're building also the e-commerce. So it's going to be quite interesting to follow, I would say, how Little Red makes that transition from like a social media review channel into with an e-commerce element. But they're certainly doing very, very well in lifestyle product, food, beverage, and what have you. So certainly a channel to be on, I would say, for brands.
And like we were saying before, it's really important to have an understanding. We have an in-house team, but we also have a PR communications agency who we're always discussing with to really know where things are going, and things might be completely different in 3 months, and that's just the reality of the market.
Yeah, I mean, what we found, for example, is that food and beverage is really being taken by Douyin, is getting very, very heavy, very active in food and beverage product reviews. So they are finding a niche there. So for anyone in that business, Douyin is very relevant. But otherwise, Xiaohongshu certainly also have food and beverage, but definitely makeup and apparel and other female-oriented products.
May we next slide, please?
Good. So so on the first part of the meeting here, what we just went through, we touched more about the online touch points we had to the consumer. Now we go into the good old brick and mortar, the retail, which of course in many ways looks like retail anywhere else in the world, but we will highlight some of the differences and something to think about if one wants to run offline retail here. A little bit of our company. So we've been in the business for a number of years. We are a retail partner, which is that we own and operate the stores. We think about it as a franchise concept for consumer brands. So we have had, today we have Lego we are authorized partner for Lego in Shanghai and in Jiangsu area. So that's a big part of our business. Beforehand, we worked a lot with Apple, Huawei, and consumer electronics. So nuances of running and operating stores and so on is certainly something we have experience with. The direct selling every day in our 50 stores. We have, of course, consumers coming in, hopefully, especially after COVID. We're happy they're back. So and how to deal with them, how to get them into the store, how to keep them in the store, and hopefully they leave the store with a nice yellow bag that says Lego on is of course that conversion of sale and getting them back again, right, in the retail concept. And for us, in point number 8, really what we find is retail is detail, and that's certainly true around the world. But how to attract the consumer in China, where there's so much choice, right? They could actually, many of the products you find in the mall, they could buy on Tmall or Little Red and so on. And in some ways, that may even be more convenient in some ways, but you don't have the instant gratification. So, finding a way to position your offline retail and understanding why that's important is critical. And one of the key takeaways that we'll give, of course, during the presentation is you really need both, right? You need to think holistically about both your online and your offline presence and how they come together in order to really convince the consumer that this is capture that share, that wallet is important. So yeah, maybe next slide, Nikolai, please. So a little bit of online retail matters, absolutely, right? I mean, there's been a lot of talk the last years about online, and China certainly online sales is massive. It's probably around 20%. Some categories is more, some categories is less, which is big. But it also means that 80% of consumption happens offline. So really, in order to think of scale, it's one really needs to think about offline in many consumer categories, and it's a big battle. So of course the mall operators, which also are big, in China, most consumption happens in malls. We don't have so much the pedestrian streets and what have you. There's a little bit, but it's mainly mall operators. So they're competing among themselves, and they're also competing against the Alibabas of the world. And they've gotten, they have a lot of resources. They're getting extremely competitive, and they understand what they can offer to the consumer in order to get the consumer into their stores again and again. And what we see a lot is, around that whole enhanced brand experience. I mean, the mega malls today they're places where people can live their whole life. It's not just like a collection of stores with a parking lot in front of that you can drive to when you go in and do your purchases and hop into the car and drive away. And that's what we think is driving a lot of this mall death around the world. But here in Shanghai, in Asia, really you see mixed use developments. So it's not just the mall. You have hotels associated to it. They're built on top of intersections of subway stations, so it's super easy to come in and out. You have office complexes. So and of course F&B is getting a huge proportion of malls, maybe 30-40% in some malls. So really people start to live their whole life in the mall, and that's what we call the extension of the living room. It's also something to do with that people have generally smaller living spaces at home, and there could be the multi-generational and so on. So a lot of things happens in the mall that may have happened in the home in Europe, right? So people are meeting friends, they're hanging out in the weekends, may not even have a purpose, just let's meet at the mall. And of course, we're gonna, eat and drink, have coffee, and then shopping happens, right? So of course, for brands to be visible and be present there where the consumer is, of course, is extremely important. And the whole retail experience it's really out of this world. I mean, you see some of the top malls, even normal malls in Shanghai. It's very, very well done. So for a brand owner, of course, be there to meet the consumer, but also the credibility. If one is more of a niche brand that may not carry a global heavyweight, or in China one is fairly unknown, opening up a store in a prime location can give that instant credibility to say, oh my God, if you are in Gateway 66 or you are in whatever Taikoo Hui, then wow, you're next to all these other great brands. So the fact that you are here and the mall operator chose to work with you, the consumer will say, okay, there's something here, and that may be what really brings them into the store. So like a strategic positioning in order to build the brand. And that's a bit what I heard Stefano talking about early on in the presentation. It's not about the sale, it's also about building that credibility, and having retail positions definitely does that. It's not just sale per square meter, even though of course that is an incredibly important KPI. Of course, what you can do in offline retail is also you experience the product, whether it's shoes on, glasses, or toys, and so on. I mean, at the end of the day, we are physical human beings who like to go and touch the field. We want to try it on. We want to see the colors in real person. A lot of this stuff is very, very hard to do on a small mobile phone screen. So especially if it's the first sale, that whole education and bringing the awareness to the brand, and also the differentiation, right? How do I use this? And store manager can really convert that initial interest into a sale. So stores, I would say, for new brands, really provides that, whereas just having an online presence, one shouldn't be surprised if there's very little organic traffic into the store. Comes really down to retail entertainment, right? So the experiences you can provide through the activities we do, the touch, the feel, the smell, the mood, the services, right? So again, a brand experience may not just be the brand itself, the product itself, but also the feel you get from it, and so forth, right? So that can come through in the offline retail, and that's of course hard and impossible to replicate offline. Convenience and instant gratification certainly also. Yes, we do get 30-minute deliveries, but more and more consumers are actually fed up with a Tmall 2 to 3 day delivery time, which is mind-boggling. But that's just too slow, even for products like, let's say, toothpaste and so on, one may not need right this moment, but people are just used to, okay, I have a thought, I go down to the store and I get it delivered in 30 minutes. It's just, I need it right now. The store, of course, will provide that. And of course, cross-selling opportunities. Once you got the customer in, they look around, they hang around, and you can show them your whole SKU range. So again, for a brand in China, you can really, that helps educate the consumer. What we see is, I mean, if you look at the pictures, the top picture there, you probably will say, well, Klaus, you probably just cheated and you paid all these people to queue in front of your store, and that was just 5 minutes like that, and 5 minutes later everybody was gone, right? But no, that was, this particular store we opened, this is in Jiangsu. It's one of the less affluent districts. I think actually the less affluent district in Jiangsu is a new mall. The mall had a massive promotional campaign in order to, it was a big buzz the whole weekend in terms of opening the mall, and they managed to attract people from the whole of Suzhou and Jiangsu. That people traveling 1 hour. And how do you do that? Of course, a lot of activities, promotional activities. We had some products that was only sold that day, so we got VIP customers coming in from Shanghai to some of the collectors. And in the end, I mean, we had to put, it literally looked like that 10 hours or so that Saturday. So we had to have cashiers outside. We couldn't have the cashiers inside the store. There was simply, the store would be completely jammed up. So we put 5 cashiers outside the store, and you don't see this. You just see people queuing to get into the store. On the left side of the picture, you don't see that. There's another queue for people that want to buy. So I mean, that whole run out, right? That whole engagement that weekend was just fantastic. Everybody had a great time, and it was in, I think it was like September last year, so still under COVID, not heavy lockdowns, but definitely a tricky time to do so. So working with the mall operators and create these buses, and they've done promotions and marketing in their local districts for months before coming. Everybody knew the mall was opening that day, and everybody was pumped up, excited, and people came and had a good time. So of course, piggybacking on that would generate a lot of traffic, and you can't do yourself with a normal marketing budgets. So again, offline retail certainly matters, but it depends.
I think, for example, for us, compared to COVID, I think especially in first and second tier China, the brand awareness for Lego is quite high, where for us, retail is often where we're meeting certain consumers for the first time. So like Kofi was saying, where your store is, who's next to you, how good is the mall at doing activation, what does the mall say about you, is extremely important. So when I discuss with our CEO, for example, how many stores are we opening in the next year, my answer is often, well, it depends on how many good locations we can find. That may be 1, that may be 5, but when they're there, take them, because it's pivotal to the success and to the brand perception.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll touch on that on the next slide, actually. So that was a good lead in. So next slide, please, Nikolai. Did my screen freeze? Or yeah, here we go. Okay, perfect. Slide before. Yeah. So it's offline retail for me as a brand. So I mean, of course, it depends on a number of factors, right? And we try to lay down some of the considerations, but also the challenges. And again, I don't think they're any different from in China than anywhere else, other than certainly, rents and costs of setting up stores can be very expensive. But some of the considerations to go through is, on your product and formats. Is my product relevant for offline, or is it purely online? Right, that's important to think through, and probably one already know that before coming here. But then you have different formats, and as you see on the pictures here on the left, with Georg Jensen, there's the beautiful store in the Yingtai in the Park Hyatt building in Beijing, I believe that one is. and below is a shop in the shop, and there's kiosks and other ways, and one can be present in retail. But I'll say those are the a big mono-brand store or multi-brand stores or a store in the store is ways to come in. So that's a bit of what's lead into also what's the purpose of the presence. Is this purely experience and educational, and you're happy to have the consumer go online and make the purchases there? Oh, fantastic. Maybe you just need a flagship store in one big city, and people who want to try the product can do that, and then they go online and maybe encourage the product, the consumers, to go online and buy by having scannable QR codes in the stores, and you get the sale through there. Or you really want to have the person get into the to the store and stay there, come back into the store, because you as your brand, you want to make that offline experience. Graphical focus. What I see, some brands come and they open one store in a number of cities. I see some people that focus on one city and open up a number of stores, and there's pro and cons. But certainly thinking through, okay, what's my customer focus? What's my demographic? It used to be, open up a store in Hong Kong and then one in Shanghai was probably the way to go, and it's probably not too far from the truth for most European consumer brands. But there's more to it today, right? I mean, it's and think about the team and the management and so on. So really, what's your rollout strategy in terms of cities and regions is very important. But also then within, so let's say, okay, great, I now decided I'm a Shanghai brand, and that's where I want to be, right? Okay, I mean, there's in Shanghai alone, we are in 40 malls, and there's a number of malls that we don't want to be in, that's not relevant for us. So there's just a massive proliferation of malls. Some of these malls are even in walking distance between each other. In some of the let's say real shopping areas, there may be 5, 6, 7, 8 malls all around, right? So think through, okay, which mall is right for me? Then within the mall, which location? So I need to understand what are the separations in the mall between the various product categories, to understand traffic, understand what are the who come in through what doors into the mall, who takes the subway, for an example, where they normally come in through B1 and B2, and that's why you see a lot of supermarkets and stores that target that consumer. Then are people that come in from the parking lot, and they take maybe the escalator up to first floor, and there's some that come in from the street. So the whole positioning in the mall. I mean, some of these malls are 300,000 square meters, right? So it's not just being in the mall; it's also where in the mall. And then, well, as Steph also said, maybe if this is the location you want, but lo and behold, it's not available. Especially in the mature malls, it's very, very hard to get in, and the mall operator will have a very high bar. They may not want to take a risk, quote unquote, with a new brand. They just want to sell stuff they understand, that the consumer know, and so on. So then one can work with new malls, and all the time new malls are built, they come up. So that's another strategy, but then you don't have the mature, the traffic and so forth. And then in involvement, there's a number of ways: owned, which probably most brands do, but also franchise. So obviously, as we look at the challenges, but opening up physical retail is, extremely hands-on and engaging, and it requires resources. Building the team takes time. Hiring senior management and then down to store management and so on, and taking that time of resources, training and so on is a big commitment. You have the commitments you need to do around with the malls and the real estate. It's almost multi-year commitments. You need to do your refurbishment cost, and there may be deposits. I mean, it's heavy expenditure down to regulatory licenses, which gets more and more heavy. Working with of course with the fire brigade, and just a number of chops and things you need to get in place before you can open up. And it's an ongoing dialogue with a number of government entities in order to have a presence. COVID is a big one. We have a slide later on, because that's of course one of the questions that we foresee that the audience will have here. How do you manage this in a COVID world? And of course, it's extremely hard. But that's a challenge. It's something one needs to think through. Logistics, and at the end of the day, investment. It's of course getting to China in a retail format is getting more and more expensive, and one should be prepared for multi-year budgets and hopefully some decent sized ones in order to open up a decent network of stores in order to build that brand. So a number of considerations to think through in order to, as part of that thought process, right? Is offline retail for me? Is it something that we are willing to commit to?
I think I can add on maybe an example from us that since we started growing quite aggressively on Tmall, the thought of the team was, this is a market where almost all brands over the last 20 years are new. Maybe as a European, there's X amount of brands that we already know, that we trust, that our parents have said are good or that friends have said are good, but almost all brands have launched in the last 20, 25 years on this market. So for me, the idea of having key physical stores is also building brand validity in a market that's full of, digital only brands that maybe don't exist in the real world. So for example, with our first store, we even did live streaming from the store quite often. We did events. Now we're building a live stream studio that mimics our Copenhagen flagship store to highlight both that we have a large flagship store in Copenhagen, but also the looks of that and the style and the Scandinavian feel. So for 98% of the country who will not see one of our stores, they can still get the confirmation that this is who we are, and not some random brand that's digital only.
Absolutely, and then you get that spillover from the location. I mean, the first the top left picture, your store in Intai, I believe that one is right. I mean, it's just a perfect example of that. I remember you drive into Park Hyatt, which is one of the prime, obviously, hotels and locations in Beijing. You literally, the first thing you see before you're coming to the hotel entrance is to the left of the store, is that Georg Jensen sign, and it's massive, right? I mean, it's a huge logo. You managed to get up there. I don't know how much money you paid for it, but it's very well done.
It's not very Scandinavian.
Of course, but you get a certain exposure, right? People come in, business, high-end tourists and what have you, and they see that, and you come into the lobby before you go up to the reception, which is 50th floor, whatever it is. And I recall it's one of the few stores in the lobby. I can imagine a lot of people say, "Oh, I never heard about maybe Georg Jensen. What is this?" But the fact you are in Intai before they go to Park Hyatt, it tells people this is a high-end brand. I'm curious, and some people walk in, and some people walk out with some nice goods. So it's again having the brand outside, very visible, and to that very select group of people can have tremendous value, maybe even more value than the actual sales you get at some times. Yeah. Okay, next slide. So some of the customer engagement multi-points, I mean, we talk about new retail, and it's a little bit of a teasing, right? I certainly don't believe there is a thing called new retail. I don't believe there's a thing called e-commerce. At the end of the day, it's all commerce, it's all business. It's just that through innovation and technology, we get new ways to engage with the consumer. But at the end of the day, it's the same good old game of being of business. So certainly a number of ways you can do here, and I take my example here, and also Steph, as we looked at our stores, from the store opening. So you start engaging with the potential consumer, maybe even months before you open up a store, and you may not do that yourself, but the mall operator will do, when you start to promotional activities in the neighborhood. It may be physical flyers, it may be posters, it may be SMSs, Vita posts, moments out in the community. So creating that whole buzz and excitement starts early in your customer journey. So even before you even have your store opened, you can do that in the community, in physical retail. Then on the launch day, make it big, right? I mean, we got the dragon dances, we just VIP nights, kids performances. You do a lot of things in order to create that excitement. Again, coming back to the retail entertainment angle, people wanna go out and have a fun, good time, and going to the mall is one of them. So you tell them, hey, Saturday 2 p.m. this store opens, and everybody knows it's going to be fun. There's going to be freebies, and there's going to be special, things happening. People tend to show up. So catching them, early is very important. We do a lot of things around special promotions, collect items, which may not be high-end stuff. It may be T-shirts and so on, but it's people start to travel. Again, there's a big, didn't talk about it before, but gamification and collectability is a big part of things here, events, raffles, and so on, right? So really starts very early in the customer journey, that you make that excitement, make it fun for people. And then as you go through the customer journey, hopefully it's a long one, right? You have the in-store and the outside store engagement. So not only when you are open, you can engage the consumer, but certainly also through digital means, you can do it outside. But we do a lot of weekend activities. And again, because we're in the toy business, kids come, and it's almost like it's a activity center. Grandparents come in, and we have seatings for them, so the grandparents can sit for hours and just look at the kids, and bricks all over the floor and kids rolling around and playing is just great, right? So that all happenings and so on, it's what you can really do, right? I mean, that's where you make the brand, the experience really come alive, and see them play, and it's fantastic. Then of course some of them will end up as a consumer too, but certainly many times it does, and that's fine too. We typically malls are big plazas, so in the weekends we may take 40, 50 square meters or whatever, and there's some big centralized activities, and of course sales, product explanations, and so on. So that whole customer engagement, I think most people can understand that. Okay, when you open, you can do these things, but we really, I would say, take it to the next level. It's not just somebody walk into a store, a store manager greets you, and then you walk out again. I mean, it's very let's say interactive. And then outside the stores, how you engage with people. So WeChat groups is becoming very big. The local VIP customers may be engaging with that store directly and on on that personal WeChat, and so it's a great way to give news and build a personal relationship. I mean, again, coming back to retail, is a lot of it's around also physical activity or interaction with the store manager. Build that trust. The manager starts to understand the consumer, what products have been bought in the past, and start to say, okay, you bought this last time in red, maybe try the blue one here, it's going to fit well together, and okay, fabulous, right? We all like that. So that whole personal, let's say, touch one can do, but we can do it online more and more too. And there's certainly things we did in during the 2.5 months of Shanghai lockdowns that we may not be able to do delivery. A little bit before the stores open, we could start to do delivery. But engaging the consumer, everybody stuck at home, bored out of the minds, and so talk about what's coming is just great, right? So that whole holistic experience and how we engage with consumers, but it has to be very consistent. It can't be that the colors are different, or it can't be that the prices are different, or if they are, it has to be very, very carefully thought through. So one needs really to holistically think about how the consumer look at you and the brand, and make sure it's consistent, it's of high quality. I mean, one thing we see, and I think a lot of people see it too, is that in physical retail, a consumer may walk in, see a product or brand they don't know, and they'll do the research in the store on Tmall or Little Red. They'll go on, let's say, Red and see consumer reviews, right? So if you don't have, if that doesn't exist, maybe the consumer feel, I'm not too, I don't feel very, confident to make the purchase, and they leave. So that's a loss, or there may be bad reviews on, and that would be terrible, right? Then you will actually, or could actually lose a sale, and the consumer stand there with a product in their hand and look at reviews, and they're not good. So one really needs also to make sure pay attention to these things, even by only having a store. So it almost forces one to be, I would say, professionally present online.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if there's one thing that Coke and I really agree upon, is that stores need to be a full experience and expression of the brand. just having good BI and VM and the team there and some products is not enough. There needs to be a value proposition more than just a purchase.
And that's one thing I feel is very different here, is that whole, oh, I like the product, I see it here, but A, is the price right? Is that what I see, that plate to 200 INB, just taken on Tmall, if it's 150 there, okay, lost the consumer, right? So a lot of the research is actually done online and people do it instantly. So that's different. At least I haven't seen that much, elsewhere in the world. Maybe next slide, Nikolai. Good. So okay, so the COVID slide, retail new era. Let's hope not, right? So probably put a question mark there. I mean, so obviously a lockdown is the worst that can happen for any retailer. Frankly, we saw also lockdown of the online stores and logistics and so on. So it's been a pretty hard and harsh lockdown. But I mean, the stuff we had to deal with, and we had to be extremely agile. All sorts of things were thrown at us, and you need to react very, very fast. Obviously we have a decent sized team, and they are physically impacted with some of the things that happen. I mean, first of all, the first bullet point is pretty obvious, right? Okay, need to make sure there's masks and hand wash and creams and so on, and the police will come and check if we didn't have enough supply, and there was measurable in very specific quantities per employee. That could be fines, that could be all sorts of things, right? So that's very, very important. But it also comes to having sleeping bags. So before the real lockdown started, even months before, we had these patchy lockdowns where suddenly a mall would be closed for 48 hours. I mean, literally from one second to the other, doors were closed, shut, and our staff would be stuck in the stores. Sometimes even with whoever customers were in the mall, will be there holed up for 48 hours. And a floor is not a particularly nice place to sleep. So we of course, we had sleeping bags. We have all sorts of mattresses and so on. Fortunately, typically, the staff and the customers could walk inside the mall. So that would be McDonald's and restaurants and Starbucks and cinemas and so on. That typically people could move between them. So food was normally not a problem, but sleeping arrangements and of course the bright lights. I need to make sure there's eye covers so people can get a decent sleep and so on. I mean, that we had a lot of those, and they haven't split from one to the other. So a lot of stresses, obviously. Also, fortunately, our staff often thought it was a kind of a fun bonding experience, at least in the beginning. Hang out 48 hours was kind of, at least in the beginning, kind of fun. So had a bit of that. We did a lot of weekly meetings and trainings courses.
If we take anything from today, it's Kope's hot take that the floor is not a particularly nice place to sleep.
Yeah, we probably need to make them a little bit softer. And of course, the whole the mental side, make sure everybody's energetic, warm, and they stay at home, can't get to the stores. It's there's a lot of time spent from senior management to speak to people. We had the weekly town hall meetings. Fortunately, not many, but we did have a few that ended up in central quarantine. So having let's say support packages ready for that, not just for the person that went in, but also our staff typically are workers from other provinces, and they may have kids at home. They may be single. Who should look after the dog? And it's all these things we were thinking about, right? So make sure that get out to the person's home and take care of whatever needs to be taken care of while that person comes out. Unfortunately, most people come out after a few days, but we as a company certainly took that as our responsibility and reacted to that. We talked a little bit of last slide, right? But also engaging with the consumer, people are bored at home. We found WeChat is very, very good at that. But also we start to see new apps coming out, particularly just focused on group buy. As a response to the lockdown, we now see new channels, we now see new ways of selling. Going to be interesting to see whether they persist, right? Have we now fundamentally changed some consumption behavior or not from these 2.5 months? It's too early to say, but maybe, right? But we'll have to see. Fortunately, everything opened up on June 1st, which is particularly good for us because that's Children's Day, right? So kids have been away, locked up for two odd months. Everybody want to get out, so the fact we could have Children's Day was fantastic. But we were given 24 hours notice by local government to open up, and that's not a lot of time. And what we certainly had, and again, not to bug people with details, right? But again, retail is detail. In order to get our staff into the store, we had to negotiate with the staff's individual building societies, right? I mean, in Chinese, the Juwei, they may not allow people to leave the compound, even if we managed to get the store opened up and we got permission for that. If we can't get permission to get the store staff out, they typically take subways. They often have to cross district lines, and there were issues. You need to get permits and so on. If you live in one district and the store is another district, that whole travel is we had to deal with too, and help with the negotiations and issuances and all these passes and so on. So the first few days were pretty hairy, and for us, we can't miss Children's Day. It's next Children's Day is next year. So we, some of our staff, of course, the stores have been closed for 2 months. Obviously, they are not super clean. So our staff managed to get in sometimes like 2 o'clock in the morning and clean the area themselves. I mean, the mall operators often were not able to get cleaning staff in. So our staff, extremely committed. I'm blown away about the commitment as well. Got in 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever they could get in, and started to wash the floor and dust everything off and so on. I think we had 2/3 of our stores open, a little bit more actually, and now everything is opened. And so it was a bit of an experience. Let's hope that doesn't happen again. But again, of course, running physical retail, one is at the epicenter of a let's say an experience like that. And I guess the $1 million question maybe is, how's consumption now, right? I mean, we are now at the 22nd of June. We have been open up 3 weeks, and the good news, at least from what we can see in our category, is the consumption is, compared to other years, same period, is looking very good. So it's been positive, and throughout the network, throughout the days, even though there's lockdowns here and there, but generally people are coming back. They're coming back into the malls, coming back into the stores, and they and the willingness to consume certainly look like it's there. So far so good, knock on wood. But at least the message from us from the ground is that things are bouncing back pretty nicely.
Knock on wood.
So that's basically wrap it up. We had one last slide, which we're not going to spend much time on, basically saying, okay, we talked about in China, e-commerce, social media, the whole 1O, and then the other one is offline, right? The second O. Yes, there's also cross-border e-commerce, but that's been a topic before. Other speakers have covered that extensively, so we're not going to talk about that. But obviously, that exists, right? So as a brand owner or distributor want to come to China, engage with the Chinese consumer, a cross-border strategy may make sense. I personally think more in the beginning than later. There's not a lot of traffic on the cross-border stores, but it's pretty quick to set up, and there's some good operators that can help with that. So maybe it's a good first way to engage. But really, it's again, we put on new retail, right? I don't know what you think, Stefano, but I don't think anything has changed. It's business, it's commerce, right? It's just we have more channels, we have more ways to engage. So whether we call it, there's always a new term that comes up. Okay, do we call it omni-channel, new retail, coined by Jack Ma? What do we call it? Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all the same thing.
I agree. It's all basically the same, but all the details change. Nicolai?
Okay, Stefano and Klaus, thank you for sharing that. Both in, I think in your presentation you covered both the online segment of retail, but also in particular towards the end went more into details with both before and during, and dare I say after, at least for a few weeks, the lockdowns that have been here and still occur in some degree. I think the offline, the brick and mortar segment of retail in China is probably not getting covered as much as it sometimes should be in these sessions. There's a lot of focus, for good reason, of course, on the online channels and the online platforms that you also covered. And I think, first of all, I should say, if those of you who are watching have more questions, now's the time to ask them, and then we'll sure to get through them in the last 10 minutes or so that we have. But I want to stay a little bit first with the offline shops, because as we are sitting here now, some of us in various places in China, but many of you who are watching are perhaps not that developed into the Chinese market yet. So imagine you are a European, smaller, medium-sized enterprise, and perhaps you are in China, in the Chinese market a little bit, but perhaps you have not even entered yet. And then you hear the stories about partial or full lockdowns. You hear about all these complications, both in regards to the police has to see this and that, and the customers are perhaps quite different from the European markets, or perhaps also customers in other markets. What would you say, and it's a question to both of you, what would you say to sort of the skeptic who's saying that maybe now is not the time to invest into the retail in China? So it's what would you say to them, and perhaps some thoughts of the future of retail in China, if we can call it that?
So maybe I go. Yeah, maybe I go first. I mean, if you decide today you want to open up a store in a Shanghai mall, probably the quickest you can do it is in 12 months. So, I mean, you're not going to open tomorrow, right? So then you have to think about, okay, in those 12 months, what's the COVID situation going to look like? And, you know, maybe one conclusion is the last lockdown we just went through was so bad. It was so bad that hopefully we're never going to do that again, right? So, I would say, okay, if somebody is, let's say, motivated to come to China, okay, you have to look at least 1 year out in order to, when you start to incur those costs, right? So, but then there's what I think it's more relevant is also there's lower risk ways to do so. For example, you can work with a company like ours, right? We take a lot of the cost burdens, and I mean all of them, right? And team management and so on, in order to run the store network. So maybe I would imagine some brands are saying, instead of we own the locations as we've done in the past, we'll outsource that to a local partner, and that's a bit of a risk sharing we can then take, right? So I would imagine that is something that brand owners around the world would think more to. But maybe Stefano can respond to that as a brand owner, right? Owner franchise.
Yeah. I think that it is opening 1, 2, or 3 stores in isolation, I would not recommend. I think if one has interest in growing their presence in the Chinese market, having 1 to 5 strategic stores, depending on location and visibility, as part of a larger strategy. So whether that be distributors or whether that be online, I think the effect of these stores on the brand and the brand perception will outweigh the risk and the cost. But of importance, it needs to be part of a large strategy.
Thank you both for those reflections on that. And then I would like to turn it around a little bit and say, okay, maybe you're watching this session and you don't have a very negative impression. Maybe you have a very positive impression. You're ready to hit the button. You're ready to enter. You're ready to get started today or tomorrow. What could be some typical mistakes that people who hear about the unlimited possibilities of the Chinese market and the retail, no matter if it's online or not, and there are all these platforms and they have millions and millions of followers and so on, and it's growing and booming, and the new festival date, Double 11, whatever it may be, sets the record every year. What would you say to these people to perhaps slow down a little bit? I mean, not to fall down into some of the typical mistakes. Maybe some thoughts about some ways to avoid some of the classical mistakes for the Chinese market in regards to retail.
I mean, for me, I think that a lot of people get enticed by these big numbers, both in terms of how many people there are, but how much sales there is. And every year, JD and Tmall publicize these huge numbers of sales. I think it's important to know that that is not your market. Your market is a part of that and not necessarily a very big one. And finding your market within that is almost more challenging than doing it on a smaller market. So it's about creating strategy beforehand, knowing who your partners are, knowing who you have on the ground, and executing in a very targeted way. If you aim for 1.4 billion people, I think it'll be difficult to hit.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I wouldn't call it, mistakes, Nikolai, assuming, one hired the right team and is thoughtful around the market entry. I would say be patient. Gone are the days where you could come with a product, import a product, and immediately you could get eyeballs. That's gone. I mean, all the big brand owners are here. They have massive budgets. There is a lot of competition. The Chinese companies are getting big into this too. So I think the disappointment is probably the biggest thing to manage, right? Don't promise your board or your CEO that your China sales is going to be something, insert huge number in the first 1 or 2, 3 years. One going to be patient. Yes, one can be lucky, but generally it's a grind, right? I mean, it's a real lift in order to get in front of the consumer and start to have sales. So be patient. It's if one commits, commit for time. Will be my recommendation.
Okay, and as we are nearing towards the end here, I just want to answer one question. It's kind of a technical one. So asking how people can access the slides. Well, what I can answer to that is that this session is in fact being recorded in video and will be uploaded to the EU SME Centre YouTube channel. So afterwards you can access this session on YouTube, and also the slides we will share to all the participants who have registered their registration in our system after today's session is concluded. I think with that said, Stefano and Klaus, we are unfortunately reaching the end. We have received a couple more questions, and I'm sorry we cannot get through them today. But what I will do is I will share them with Stefano and Klaus afterwards, and then we can see if we can get back to them through the EU SME channel. But here by the end, not only of
of course, if anyone has any further questions or wants to have a chat, they're always welcome to send us an email or give us a call. We're happy to help.
Good addition, absolutely. So please reach out to Stefano and Klaus on any further questions as well. I just want to wrap it up by saying both, first of all, thanks to Stefano and Klaus for sharing their knowledge and their experiences today. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. But also I want to wrap a whole bow on the EU SME Centre project and say that today is the final session that we are hosting. So for those of you who have watched along several times, maybe followed some of the news, read some of the reports, contributed to some of these things, given us suggestions, a big thanks for all of those things. And the last thing I want to say is stay tuned, because it may be the end of phase 3, but there are definitely still things to come. And so keep an eye out on the platforms of the project, and we hope to engage with you in different capacity in the future as well. So from the EU SME Centre and the Danish Chamber of Commerce in China and our other implementing partners, thank you for watching, and Stefano, Klaus, thank you for sharing, and we hope to see you next time as well. So thank you and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers, Nikolai. Yeah, thank you. Cheers.